Hi there, it's Mary here with another book review, and this time I'm going to talk about The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Now, some of you may have already read one of his other books, like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. That one is even better than the movie. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie or read the book yet, but it is better than the movie. Definitely a tearjerker. This one has its moments too, but this is definitely written for a little bit more older. And Boy in the Striped Pajamas, if you didn't know, takes place during World War II, and it's about a 10-year-old boy whose father is sent to run one of the camps. So that one definitely has its sad moments. It's written about a 10-year-old boy. It's actually not intended for 10-year-olds. So this is definitely a more adult book in many ways. I really like that it explores a lot of the changing of the times socially and acceptance. The way this book starts is with the main character's mother being kicked out of her town by the priest for being an unwed mother. Now, this is Ireland just after World War II ended. Ireland was not a member of the war, but some of their people did go and fight with the British against the Nazi army. So, I think it's really interesting, and there are probably going to be spoilers along the way. Deal with it. For things that I read about this book going into it, I saw things like, oh, it's going to make you laugh, it's going to make you cry, and I got to a point where I was like, okay, it's supposed to make me cry. Not that I expected to necessarily actually do that, but at least have something sad and tragic. And just after I thought, when is that going to happen, there was a moment that just wrecked me, and I was bawling. I even had to tell a friend who had spoken to me not long after that moment that it was good tears, it was from the book, it wasn't anything in my life, it was completely the book. So I think that it's interesting how when he first comes of age, he is a homosexual male, which is fine, but at the time when he's coming of age, in Ireland that was illegal. So they would have to hide that and sneak around, and he did participate in some iffy choices, we'll just say that. He did end up, I'm going to give away some stuff, just deal. He did end up being given up for adoption by his birth mother. She had to pretend she was married to get a job. She actually went and bought herself a cheap wedding ring so she could pretend she was married to get a job in a tea room in a government building. And then would pretend that she lost her child in birth. So, and adoption's not a bad thing. It ended up being pretty good for this guy, it seems like. His family seemed to be very understanding, even though they weren't the most affectionate family. The family that he grew up with still seemed to have a lot of open-mindedness in a lot of ways. His mother, the one that was his adoptive mother, in fact his father insisted on him referring to them as his adoptive parents, was a writer who turned out to be a famous writer, but she didn't value her writing the same way others did. She felt like it was selling out or not as good if people thought your work was good and buy it. It's an interesting story. So when he's about 6 years old, he actually meets who will become his best friend, and a boy/man that he ends up having a crush on most of his life. This man was, even at 6 years old, was very hetero. He already knew he wanted to please women and have lots of sex with women. So obviously that was not going to help our main character in his obsession, in a way. So there are a lot of journeys in this, including social norms and how they've changed in places versus time and all these things, which is really interesting. I also liked how small of a world it is. I just recently watched a video myself on a study that found 6 degrees of separation is the average between two people. And that was actually an older study. Now it's really more around 4 or 5 because of social media. So it is a small world because not only did he come back into contact with this 6-year-old boy that he automatically liked, again by him becoming his roommate, and just throughout life, he also throughout his journeys would keep coming in contact with his biological mother, and neither one knew that they were connected by genetics, not just coming across each other in time and place. So I think that's really interesting that she was there for a lot of important moments, or to stick up for him when he really needed it. This does address HIV, and in fact he has a long-term lover that he's very committed to, who that is what he does. He works with STIs, sexually transmitted infections, sexually transmitted diseases, whichever way you want to refer to it, communicable diseases, and his work is to try to help not only understand it but find cures and treatments for it. So they're in New York. His job at one point brings him to New York City, and of course our main character goes with him. And our main character even volunteers to visit with those who are in the hospital, basically hospice care for HIV and AIDS, especially since this is a time period when people didn't understand it. Even the doctors were still learning a lot, but the public really misunderstood how this infection worked. So a lot of patients would be abandoned, but disowned, or felt too ashamed to tell their families, so they would be alone in the hospital. And the main character would sign up to volunteer and visit with these people while they were in the hospital. Only the ones who signed up for it. And he wouldn't be given a name, he would just be given a room number when it was time to go visit someone. Well, one of these days, he actually came across, he went into the room, and it turned out it was his best friend, the one he knew from high school. And actually, previous in the book, he married his best friend's sister and then left on the wedding day, leaving her married but alone. And especially in Ireland, divorce wasn't really a thing. She couldn't get an annulment because it turned out that they had had sex once before the marriage, and she had gotten pregnant by this. So she couldn't get it annulled either. Obviously it had been consummated at some point. So he left her in Ireland, wedded to him, but kind of just stuck with that situation. Luckily today things have changed, and they did get back together and end up becoming civil. He got to meet his son, all these things. It was a nice story. We really do follow him from beginning to end, or what seems to be the end. He does eventually come across his mother again after a while. They're both in the hospital for 2 different reasons. He's there because his son is having a child. She's there because her other son that she had had out of wedlock also, but showed how times were changing, was dying. So he finds her in the chapel and he comforts her, and they get talking, and she mentions something about her firstborn son. And this was something that I kept wondering throughout the whole book. Every time they met, are they going to realize that they are related? And it's during this conversation and meetup that they start to realize that the situation where it's the same. He seems to realize it first. And so they do actually finally realize that they are mother and son. She is so worried that he's going to blame her for giving him up for adoption, which he doesn't. He was very happy in his life, really, as far as his upbringing went. It was not conventional, but it was his. So they end up becoming good friends, and kind of joins along on the journey. She's telling him he needs to exercise, all this kind of stuff. It's great. So it was a really enjoyable book. It is emotional, in my opinion. There are the highs, there are the lows. Like I said, I ended up bawling, crying at one point in the book. And then, of course, tears at the end of his life as well, because you feel like you know him. But like I said, it really does explore how times have changed, so to speak. You had the unwed mother situation where it changed even within the book from being completely not okay to being okay enough that she didn't care. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. She just went with it. She was no longer completely ostracized for this behavior. And I don't think it had to do with her being in the city as much, even though that helped. I think it also was that times were changing. His homosexuality. Once he left Ireland, he was able to really explore his sexuality in a much healthier way. No more of these underground meetups and, you know, not even a word spoken to give consent, because you had to keep everything so secretive. So a lot of anonymous sex in the earlier part of his sexuality, and then when he moved out of Ireland, he found a relationship, he found love, and then they moved to America, and then later on he finds love again. There's a reason. If I recall correctly, he found love again. But regardless. So regardless of that, the sexuality was accepted again. And you even see it another time later on when one of the children of one of the boys he considers his son, I don't remember if it was his biological son or the boy that they essentially adopted, if it was his son, I think it was his biological son, who had a child who was also homosexual, and he was able to keep that out in the open the whole time in high school. Isn't that wonderful? It's nice to see the evolution of the thought and social constraints lifting away from certain things. So I do suggest reading this book. It's a little thicker than some, but so what? I mean, it was 577 pages. I read books of all sizes, so. And its release date, does it tell me, is August 2017. So by the time I'm making this video, it is already out. But it was a wonderful read. Emotional, but wonderful. I do definitely say yay. Maybe I just like the way John Boyne writes. I probably will seek out more of his books as a result of reading this one and realizing that that's two books that I actually really loved reading and enjoyed the roller coaster of the story. So that is my review, even though, believe it or not, this is actually the third time I've had to record this because I had some camera glitches. Hopefully that was as good as the other takes. And I hope you will all keep reading. Feel free to comment below on what you think about this book or even other books. And I hope that you have a great day, and please be kind to each other.